Thank you so much for coming. And on behalf of the Dover Democratic Town Committee and the Dover Republic Committee, I'm Carol Lisbon, co-chair of the Dover Dems, and Grant Stephen is the chair of the Dover Republicans, and you'll be hearing from him in a minute as well. First things first, in this day and age, if everybody could at least put their iPhones on mute so you can check the scores quietly. I just want to give a very brief explanation of what this evening is all about and how it came to be. Back in January, Grant and I were discussing the fact that there was no organization in Dover, given that we don't have a League of Women Voters, whose mission it is to find a way to bring Doverites together to talk about the issues of the day, be they local, state, or federal. And that a lot was being done on a partisan basis, with the Dover Dems having their meetings and the Dover Republicans having theirs. And we thought maybe our committees would serve together to bring the town together for a fact-based civil discourse on whatever issues people wanted to hear about. And then we had to wait for an issue. And it was clear this summer that the 3 ballot questions were the perfect opportunity for discussion. Some of them are very confusing. Some of them are confrontational. And so we decided, let's do this. We'll do it in a beautiful manner with speakers representing both the pro and the con. And that's why we're here tonight. We hope that this becomes the first of many meetings that we have as Doverites over the years. And we will look forward to getting your input on what you might want to talk about for future meetings. So just one housekeeping issue. There is literature out in the foyer on the tables that some of the organizations supporting 1, 2, and 3 have left for you to take. So please do that on your way out. And now I would like to introduce Grant.
All right. Yes, as Carol said, my name is Grant Stephen. I'm the chairman of the Dover Republican Town Committee. Welcome. I want to just say a few comments just to kind of kick off the rest of the evening here. First of all, I want to thank everybody, both on the Democrat Party side and the Republican Party side, who helped organise and bring things together. I want to thank Charles River School for hosting this evening as well. I in particular want to welcome the high schoolers. Hands up, high schoolers. Right. Welcome, high schoolers. When we do some of these events in town, we're very eager for participation from all generations of our community, and particularly the high schoolers for obvious reasons. And we hope we can all sort of set some kind of an example of how to conduct civil local discourse about political matters and other kind of sensitive issues. So welcome, high schoolers. I do know there's the possibility of extra credit for you guys being here, so not that that was any kind of a motivating factor in you turning up, but there is a sheet on the stairs at the far end of the stage, so before you leave, I would ask you all to print your name and sign your name as well, and then that might magically transfer into extra credits. So thank you for coming. Okay, now on to the main event. I'm going to next introduce Professor Jim Rapetti, who holds the William J. Keneally SJ Chair at Boston College. Many of you will know Professor Rapetti. He's a national authority on tax law, but much more important than that, he is the moderator for the town of Dover, which is absolutely the most important thing he's done in his time. So, Professor Rapetti, over to you.
Thank you, Grant. There we go. Thank you, Grant. Our vision for tonight is that this be a facts-based discussion, not a debate, which is respectful of all positions. With that in view, here are our guidelines for the speakers and for you, the audience. 1, each speaker will have a time limit of 5 minutes for their initial comments. I will alert the speakers to when 1 minute is left. Main speakers will not be allowed to direct questions to other main speakers or to the audience. Members of the audience will not be allowed to direct questions to other members of the audience. And members of the audience will be allowed to direct questions about policy or facts to speakers through me, but will not be allowed to make statements advocating one position or another. I will recognize and respond to all audience questions and direct the questions as appropriate to our speakers. We ask that each main speaker limit his or her response to each question from the audience to 1 or 2 minutes. The spirit of this is one that will inform all of us about these very interesting and difficult issues, and we appreciate your cooperation. Our first topic for tonight will be ballot question number 1. Taking the pro position will be Nora Watts, who holds an RN and BSN from Northeastern University and who has 43 years in direct care experience. For the past 35 years, Nora has worked at Newton Wellesley Hospital, where their practice mostly focused on oncology. Nora?
Can you hear me? I've been accused earlier today that I don't hold the microphone close enough to my mouth. Well, first, I am a direct care nurse. I remember when I first graduated from Northeastern, they told me within a year I would be in administration, and I knew that that wasn't for me, that my real passion was to help people and to take care of them directly. And as you've heard, I've spent most of my life as an oncology nurse. And I've also, most of that career, been a member of the Massachusetts Nurses Association, a position that I hold near and dear and I'm extremely proud of because of the public health positions that the organization has taken and their support of safe patient care. And I actually have been involved in this issue for 20 years since we first started pursuing the issue. And why do we need this? Well, we need this because if you are admitted to a hospital in Massachusetts this day and age, you are extremely ill and you need 24-hour surveillance by registered nurses. There's sophisticated technology being used in the hospital, and it's the nurses who are at your bedside who are monitoring this sophisticated technology. They're taking care of your wounds and dressings, they're taking care of your pain, and there need to be enough nurses at all times at the bedside. There are over 2 decades of peer-reviewed research that support the kinds of numbers that you see in the safe patient limits. In the safe patient limits question, this is some of the abstracts with regard to those 70 studies. And I shake a little bit because I care so very, very, very much about this. And we know that bad things happen. We have a problem in the state of Massachusetts with avoidable readmissions. We're near the top number in all of the United States. I've read 6 from the top. I've read 4 from the top, 2 from the top. But the real bottom line is that we're having way too many avoidable readmissions for things like urinary tract infections from catheters, pneumonia, and congestive heart failure. And we compare with California a lot. And the reason that we do that is because they've had safe patient limits, slightly different law, but safe patient limits for the past 14 years. And the researchers do study California, and their rates of morbidity and mortality are going down way faster than they are in Massachusetts. Their performance is better on those indicators, specifically pneumonia and readmission for CHF. So people are doing better out in California, and we think that here in Massachusetts we need to set safe patient limits and to make that happen. So how did we get here? Why is this a ballot question? So like I said, 20 years. So we have gone to the legislature many, many times on this issue, and in fact, back in 2008, we came to a compromise in the House with the Hospital Association, working on that. And then when we got to the Senate, they reneged on the deal, so we didn't get to pass the legislation. Then in 2014, a compromise was reached on the ICU staffing. But within an hour, the hospitals tried to exclude neonatal ICUs, burn units, and cardiac care units. We finally did set limits for the ICUs where it's 1 to 2. And we found that since the law's been implemented, there are a number of hospitals that are not complying with the law. So when we came to put the ballot question together, we put this fine, it gets talked about $25,000, up to $25,000. But I want you to all understand that is not an automatic fine. What will happen when this is passed is that regulations will be set on the bill by the Healthcare Policy Commission. And then if there are complaints filed against a hospital, and the Healthcare Policy Commission reviews it and forwards it to the Attorney General, there'll be yet another investigation, and then it's the Attorney General's office who would set a fine or set up a correction plan for a hospital. But what we really hope is that the hospitals will comply with the law. The whole point is not to fine hospitals. The point is to comply with safe patient limits and make sure that you get the care that you deserve when you're in a hospital. And that's what I have to say.
Okay, our next speaker who will be taking the con position is Kathy Davison. Kathy is the Chief Nursing Officer and Chief Operating Officer at the Beth Israel Deaconess Needham Hospital. She was a staff nurse and nurse manager before continuing her management career at hospitals in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Most recently, she was the Chief Nursing Officer at Norwood and Boston Medical Center. Her experience in both large academic medical centers and community hospitals gives her a unique perspective on nursing and hospital operations.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to help you understand, and from my own personal experience, why I would be voting no on ballot question number 1. The ballot question lists out mandated staffing ratios for all hospitals at all times. So the first major problem with these mandated staffing ratios is that they're very rigid. And in nursing, what's really critical, because of the fluid changes and volume changes and just the nature of the business, is the ability to be flexible to meet patient needs. So the mandated ratios that have been set forth are rigid, and again, it's putting for all hospitals at all times, and it's not really like that in the business. It's not one size fits all. So that's the major problem. The ratio of 1:4 on med-surg units 24/7 is not really something most nurses would even understand, because the activity during the day is quite different than at night. Other parts of the mandation, which again is not evidence-based, which means it's not based on research, it hasn't really been tested, is that for psychiatric hospitals, a 1:5 ratio, for rehab hospitals, a 1:5 ratio, is really not something that is even something that could be implemented, because that's not how those disciplines run. So the ratios are set up very rigid at all times, and nurses work as a team. It's a healthcare team in a hospital. So the unintentional consequences of these mandations are really critical for all of you to understand. So right now in Needham, we staff based on patient need. There are a lot of variables based on the experience of the nurses, based on the volume coming in and out of a unit, and that's what we deal with. And every 4 hours, nurses and nursing management work together to understand how we can best care for patients. So what would happen if this mandated ratio went through is nurses would really lose their autonomy. Nursing is a profession, and government mandated staffing levels would really take that professionalism and autonomy away from nursing. That's very concerning for me, because I feel as a nurse leader, I represent nurses. And I'm not saying that there aren't staffing issues. I'm sure there are. Every hospital deals with an influx of patients. Nurses call in sick. We do everything to make sure we put enough patients and nurses together to ensure high quality care. Now, Massachusetts has the best health care in the country, and that's measured in metrics, so that's a fact. And unfortunately, the promoters of this mandate continuously talk about California. And the problem is, when California implemented these mandates, they were different mandates, because we don't really understand the background of these, the ones that are in the ballot question. So California put through different numbers. They allowed 5 years for the implementation. This allows 37 days. So most hospital leaders can't even understand how we would implement them. So the unintentional consequences will really end up hurting patients, because if we're told it's a 1:4, you have the number of patients and the number of nurses, that's it. If any more patients come through the emergency room, they're going to have to wait, because they can't come in. And so there's going to be access problems, longer ED waits. We're very concerned about what's going to happen to patients. The other important thing you need to understand is the cost of this mandate. It's a $1 billion cost to Massachusetts in the first year. And the other problem with that is, right now we have a nursing shortage in Massachusetts of 1,200 nurse vacancies. This will require another 4,000 to 5,000 nurses by January to implement, and at a cost of $1 billion. So it's really impossible to understand how it would be able to be implemented. And in California, what happened was the 37 hospitals closed, and 50% of the nurses that were brought in from other states. So what's really important for you to understand is that the profession of nursing would really like to take charge of this problem, and we know there needs to be answers, but this mandated ratio ballot question is not a good one. It's not one that's really going to help our patients, and the downward costs will end up going to the patients also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now open it up for questions. If you raise your hand, I'll recognize you and you can pose your question for our two experts.
I have a microphone here that I'll bring to you before you voice your question.
Hi, my question is for Nora. Nora, what is the real implementation date? I know I hear a lot about 37 days, and I just know from state ballot questions, we're still waiting for marijuana to be completely mandated. So what is the true mandation time?
So the law will be effective January 1st, but what that really means is that the hospitals have to come up with a plan by that point in time to implement it. I mean, Beth quoted the marijuana law, but they have to come up with a plan as to how they're going to hire nurses. I would go further and say, in terms of a nursing shortage, I believe it was the Kaiser Foundation that did research that said that Massachusetts isn't going to have a nursing shortage until about 2030. In fact, the Board of Registration numbers show that there are about 100,000 nurses that live in the state of Massachusetts. Not all those nurses are working. I know that actually there was a real good anecdotal story this afternoon. One nurse told me that 2 new grads who would love to have nursing jobs are currently working as waitresses in Boston because they can make more money there, and they can't find jobs with benefits in Boston or in Massachusetts to work, and a lot of nurses have actually left Massachusetts. We do graduate 3,500 new nurses every year, and again, the information that I have is that we won't have a nursing shortage. We actually, the only state in the nation that has more nurses than Massachusetts is South Dakota. The only other area that has more per capita nurses than we have, I meant that number per capita, is the District of Columbia has more. So South Dakota and the District of Columbia. So Massachusetts does not have a nursing shortage. They have a shortage of nursing who are working.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I have a quick question. Well, could I please respond to that?
Sure.
Because when you asked about the implementation date, it's important to understand when you do read the ballot question, it will tell you 231E says there will be no waiver and no delay in the implementation of the law. And we can, we I guess have our own data on a nursing shortage, but there are over 100,000 RNs in Massachusetts, that's true. Many of them don't work for many reasons. And the reason why a lot of the new graduate nurses are not necessarily getting jobs, are twofold reasons. Some of them are graduating with associate degrees, and academic medical centers insist on a college degree. And the other reason is a nurse is not a nurse is not a nurse. So we need emergency room nurses, operating room nurses, maternity nurses, psychiatric nurses, and those are called specialty nurses. So they have to be trained in that area. So right now there are 1,200 vacancies, which means, for instance, In Needham, I have travelers that I bring in because there are no nurses trained who want to work. And it isn't because of anything to do with ratios, there is a nursing shortage. And for this to require 4,000 additional RNs, nobody really has an answer as to where they will come from.
Question back?
Hi, Nora. This question is for Nora. With respect to your citing the California success story, were those staffing ratios the same as the ones proposed in this ballot? Are they greater in number? Do you know this?
No, the numbers are not the same. And the reason the numbers are not the same is because we looked at the 20 years of research, and we listened to our nurses, and we listened to the nurses in California. And so the research certainly substantiates it. Like I said, 70 peer-reviewed studies done by people like Linda Aiken, and and even statements. I really love the statement from Leah Curtin, who is the American mother of nursing. She's from the ANA, the American Nurses Association, whose Massachussetts branch is supporting this. And she specifically states, let's see if I can find it. Fortunately, a great deal of study and research has been done in the past 2 decades to help determine safe care. There is really no justification in saying we just don't know, or the data is inconclusive, or that it's a judgment call. These statements, every one of them, at the very least, untrue. We put patients at risk if we do not staff according to the data. The ethical conversation is over. And I left these out on the.
So are the numbers the same?
No, the numbers are not the same. The numbers, they had LVNs, which Massachusetts does not have a lot of licensed practical nurses working in hospitals anymore. We pretty much have registered nurse staff and nursing assistants, so it's a bit different.
I can add to that. California has a 1-to-5 ratio. This is a 1-to-4 ratio at med-surg floors. So it is much stricter. And the California's ratios, there was a lot of ability to be flexible, and there's no flexibility in the mandates here. They're rigid.
Yeah, that was
at all times, 24/7. If the nurse has to go to lunch or go to radiology with a patient, you have to find a nurse somewhere to come in. So that's...
They do have relief nurses in California.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Yes, Dr. Roper.
I was hearing from a nurse friend of mine, she's an ER nurse in Boston. She said, from her understanding anyway, the ratios in the Boston hospitals were very similar to what is in the ballot questions, and that maybe it was the smaller towns that would have a bigger impact. Can either of you speak, or both of you speak to what sort of changes would be on the smaller hospitals?
Well, I think the major concern with this ballot question is that the impact on the small hospitals will be more significant. So academic medical centers tend to have maybe a higher acuity, which means the patients may be sicker, but you can have sick patients in a community hospital also. So it really depends, because nurses and nursing leadership work together to understand what's the best staffing for the emergency room or the operating room or the ICU, etc. What's different about this actually is an emergency room staffs based on the historical data of how much volume comes to the emergency room. We're having difficulty understanding what this mandate means because it now goes into a 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-3, 1-to-4, 1-to-5, and that's not really how emergency rooms function. So it's very concerning that once an emergency room is filled, and that's the amount of staffing based on the 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-3, nurses won't be able to help each other. They won't be able to go to the waiting room and get a patient with chest pain because they have their ratio. And so, for instance, in Needham, we average 45 patients coming through the emergency room per day. But it might be 30 one day and 60 the next. You cannot predict what an emergency room will be like. So you staff, and then you call in additional staff if it's busy. So we're not quite sure how this will work at all. So, but Boston and community hospitals do staff very similar. It's really the acuity of the patient that's important.
So a little more to say about that. First of all, when you have upstaffing on the floors, you'll be able to move the patients out of the emergency room more quickly. More staffing makes more sense, right? That you can get to the appropriate level of care. Some of those numbers that Kathy,
Yes.
that she talked about, the unstable and the stable, there are currently ICU patients that are sitting in the ER, so that was to accommodate the fact that a person who is ICU level of care, who's still sitting in the emergency room, needs to have ICU level of care when they're there, and that the ERs need to be staffed. In terms of, we know we have, am I saying the right thing, EMTALA, so we cannot turn ambulances away, and I don't know any nurse in any situation who isn't going to operate to take the best care of the patients who show up on the door. So yes, we expect them to staff. We don't expect to have to make complaints. As I said, the whole reason of putting the stick, if you will, in the bill is to make sure that the hospitals staff according to what the needs are. And they know sometimes there are ICU patients now in the ER.
Okay, any more questions? Yes. Okay.
I'm curious what's changed in healthcare, that this has been an issue for 20 years that we have not been able to solve. I mean, if we're at the center sort of the healthcare universe in the United States, and we can't sort of figure out a way to work between whether it's management and staff, how to manage this properly, that concerns me, and that's where I see ballot initiatives coming in, is people get frustrated and they say, we're not going to fix a problem the other way, so this might be our only tool that we see. I'm wondering if either of you can sort of address that.
May I answer? So, like I said in my original statement, we, first of all, from a personal level, I work at Newton Wellesley Hospital, but I don't want you to think this is about Newton Wellesley Hospital. It's about every hospital in Massachusetts. But I sat on staffing committees trying to deal with this issue for a number of years, probably at least 15 of the last 20 years, thereabouts. And then I also went to the State House and spoke to our legislators repeatedly. And as I said, in 2008, we made a deal in the House. We made a compromise in order to try to get legislation passed to deal with an issue that we weren't seeing dealt with by hospital managements. When nurses are burning out, I mean, a new grad, average that they stay in the profession is 3 to 5 years before they burn out. I can tell you that a week and a half ago, when I was standing doing a standout, literally somebody called me over to their car and she said, tell me, is this the nurses on the floor that want this or is it management? And I said, oh no, I'm a staff nurse, and I helped to write the question if I'm being really honest with you. And she said, they burnt me out years ago, that's why I'm not a nurse in the hospital anymore, I understand. You know, we've tried those things, and you know, we've got to a compromise in the House. They reneged on the compromise when it got to the Senate. In 2014, they immediately tried to take the, when we got the ICU law, take the NICU, the burn unit, the cardiac intensive care unit off the list of the ICU and ratio law as soon as we'd made the deal. So we've tried working with the hospitals and it isn't happening. So that's why we're taking it to the voters, to all of you who are potential patients any day of the week, the same as me.
I would like to just respond. I think the reason why it's been 20 years and it hasn't been able to get through the legislature is because it's probably not a good idea. So I think we work together to try to come up with the best plan to take care of patients and what are the right numbers, and we've made a lot of progress with that. And in 2014, when the legislature did let the ICU staffing ratio go through, it really was a way to hope that the M&A would kind of just go away for a bit and give it a rest. And the 2-to-1 ratio in ICUs really didn't change. So since it went into effect, hospitals did staff 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 in ICU. So it really didn't change all that much, but unfortunately, some neonatal NICU, intensive care unit beds did close, which was the unfortunate side effect and consequence which they were trying to avoid. Because NICUs run different than adult ICUs. But so I think it's been there 20 years because nobody's really said this was a good idea. It's very concerning it's now a ballot question because I feel healthcare professionals should be making this decision versus citizens who really are having difficulty understanding exactly the problem and the answers.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is up for ballot question number 1. Thank you. Really appreciate your input. Okay, now we'll be moving on to ballot 2. Speaking in the pro position for ballot 2 is Paul Lowenstein. Paul is a retired business owner from Sharon, where he served on both the planning board and the water committee. He currently volunteers for We the People Massachusetts, a group dedicated to achieving a constitutional amendment to realize the foundational vision of government of, by, and for the people. Well,
thank you, Phil. Good evening. My name is Paul Lowenstein. I'm a retired business owner from Sharon, and I'm here to explain what question 2 would do and give you reasons to vote for it. Question 2 would set up a nonpartisan 15-member commission to promote a constitutional amendment to overturn Supreme Court decisions such as Citizens United that have put the interests of large corporations and billionaires ahead of the interests of the public. The amendment would affirm that artificial entities do not possess the inalienable constitutional rights of real people, and that campaign contributions must be limited to end the influence of big money on elections and public policy. The Commission's non-binding recommendations would be due at the end of next year. So why should you vote yes on question 2? These days, if you don't have money, you have no voice in public affairs. One person, one vote has become $1 million, one vote. The consequences are grave, as the following 4 examples show. 1, every year, 30,000 Americans die of gunshot wounds. Yet passing common sense gun laws favored by heavy majorities is next to impossible because of the influence of the NRA, which doles out millions in campaign contributions. 2, at least 200,000 Americans have died in the opioid epidemic. The pharmaceutical industry poured over $1 million into the election campaigns of key members of Congress who got the Justice Department to agree to a more lenient industry law, undermining DEA's ability to curb the flow of addictive pain pills. Number 3, Depression-era banking regulations stabilized our economy for 50 years as the middle class grew and prospered. Beginning in the 1980s, however, big banks got Congress to weaken or eliminate such rules. The boom and bust business cycle returned, culminating in the Great Recession of 2008, when millions of Americans lost their jobs, homes, and life savings. 4, despite global warming, fossil fuel companies can count on Congress for billions in tax breaks and subsidies. The problem of corporate domination of our democratic institutions goes beyond money and politics. When artificial entities are entitled to the inalienable constitutional rights of human beings, the ability of we the people to govern ourselves breaks down. Remember Joe Camel, the mascot created to market cigarettes to kids? In 1998, Massachusetts passed a law to ban cigarette advertising within 1,000 feet of schools and playgrounds. The Supreme Court struck down the law, saying it violated the First Amendment speech rights of tobacco companies. Should corporations have a constitutional right to say anything they want, regardless of the consequences for society? Or should we, the people, through our elected representatives, have the right to pass laws to protect our children, regardless of the consequences for corporate profits? Sometimes the Supreme Court gets it wrong. Dred Scott v. Sanford upheld slavery until it was overturned by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Minor v. Happersett deprived women of the right to vote until it was overturned by the 19th Amendment. Oregon v. Mitchell deprived 18-year-olds fighting in Vietnam of voting rights until it was overturned by the 26th Amendment. The Supreme Court also got it wrong with Citizens United. Now only those with big money have a voice in public affairs, regardless of the consequences for 99% of Americans. Despite the first 3 words of the Constitution, we the people no longer govern. We have allowed billionaires and multinational corporations to take the place of King George and the East India Company. 4 Supreme Court justices dissented in Citizens United. Justice John Paul Stevens wrote, "Corporations help structure and facilitate the activities of human beings, to be sure, and their personhood often serves as a useful legal fiction, but they are not themselves members of we the people, by whom and for whom our Constitution was established." The only lasting way to overturn a flawed Supreme Court decision is to amend the Constitution. So far, 19 states and 800 cities and towns have passed resolutions calling on Congress to propose a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. Passing question 2 would send another message to our political leaders to set their partisan bickering aside and propose a constitutional amendment to realize the vision of government of, by, and for the people. Please vote yes on question 2.
Thank you, Paul. Our speaker who will be taking the con position is Paul Craney. Paul is a spokesperson and serves on the board of the Massachusetts Fiscal Alliance. He graduated from Gordon College and is a first-generation American. His mother immigrated to the United States from Mexico City. He previously was the executive director and was the first hire of the organization. Prior to his role at Massachusetts Fiscal Alliance, he worked in politics in New Jersey and Washington, D.C. Paul?
Sounds like you got that bio off of our website.
We did.
Thank you for having me come and speak, and I really appreciate the fact that I'm able to be here today. So there's a lot of issues that were packed into the yes on 2 portion there, but broadly speaking, campaign finance law should have 2 guiding principles whenever they're debated, considered, or passed. And it's actually pretty simple. It should be clear so that everyone can understand it and follow it, and it should be fair so that all different entities, voices, sides of the debate have the same opportunity to express themselves. The issue of Citizens United, which is slightly different from question 2, I'll speak about that, involved, like the title says, a group of citizens. I don't know how many people here have actually studied Citizens United. I'm sure many have heard about it. But the reason why I went to the US Supreme Court was because it was a group of citizens who wanted to make a documentary movie before a presidential election that named one of the candidates running for president. And they were asking the government for permission for speech. And the government at the time said, in a 5-4 decision, a group of individuals have the right for speech before an election for a documentary. That was the case of Citizens United. The Constitution is very clear on the First Amendment. It empowers people, empowers the public to have the freedom of speech. It does not empower the government to regulate your speech. That is the reason for the Constitution. It was designed that way. If you look at specifically with question 2, it calls for a commission. The commission includes citizens, individuals, but it also includes empowering legislators and lawmakers and elected officials at the State House to come up with a way to regulate the public's speech. So for most people, you kind of hear that and you say, okay, that would include the governor, that would include the Attorney General, I believe the Secretary of State, the Speaker, and the Senate President. I think most people know some of those names, but let me just put this in another context. How many people here would be comfortable with President Donald Trump and Speaker Paul Ryan regulating our speech? Okay, no hands. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, maybe President Cory Booker regulating our speech. The point is, when elected officials are in charge of regulating the public speech, it usually becomes a tool in campaign finance law to go after your opposition or opposing views. It regularly is by politicians, and that's why the Constitution was made so that the public has the right for their speech. So one, with question 2, it empowers lawmakers and legislators and politicians to come up with ways to regulate speech. 2 is the big issue of what does this proposed amendment actually say, which is not on the ballot. It's a proposed amendment pushed for by the advocates. And I think Paul correctly touched on it. He said it was artificial entities don't have a constitutional right. That sounds very boring and hard to understand, but basically what that means is individuals, everyone here, including myself, have a constitutional right, excluding everything else. So that would exclude businesses, that would exclude nonprofit organizations, because those are businesses, those are corporations, and that would also exclude unions. And not only that, but the way the amendment is proposed, it would go much farther than Citizens United. It would actually include all constitutional rights for all those entities would not be allowed anymore. So there's a lot of problems with the proposed amendment. I think it's important. I know we can keep on going with campaign finance law for a long time. It's super complicated. It's not very easy, but you have to remember campaign finance law always has two guiding principles. Is it fair and is it clear? Citizens United allowed individuals, corporations, nonprofit entities, and unions all to have the same exact type of voice, as much as they would like, so long as they don't coordinate with campaigns or candidates. So for that reason, I think it's very fair. One last thing I'd like to just say is that you hear a lot of demagoguing on rich people and businesses, but we have to think about this a little bit more, especially with businesses. Corporations, nonprofits, they have a right for a voice in the political process. I'm not saying they're people. That was something I think Mitt Romney kind of blundered on. But what I'm saying is that corporations and nonprofits and unions have a right to have speech in elections because they represent people, members. Corporations obviously represent employees. They represent stockholders. They represent people who have a living in those companies. But also, if you think about it on the other side of that, the customers of businesses have a right to hear from the business that they care about. If you have your retirement saved up with certain companies, you want to hear what they think about certain issues. I could keep on going on and on with different examples why it actually is important, not just for the corporations, nonprofits, and unions to have a voice, but also for the other people to hear from them so they can make their own decisions on different public policy matters. So I'm actually really happy to take some questions, and I can't speak for Paul, but I'm happy to stick around afterwards and get into it a little more too.
Thank you, Paul.
Maybe Paul, the right or the left.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we would now open it up for questions. Are there any questions for Paul or Paul? Yes.
I have a question for Paul in the time. For not being able to know Paul who. Listening to what you said, it sounded to me as though the issue for you would, let me put it a different way, that the concern was that people have a voice and that money should not be a part of the formula. So that would you say that you would agree with rewording, which I know can't happen on this ballot, but the question is saying that everyone should have an equal voice, but it can't be advertised on television, which costs huge amounts of dollars, and if businesses want to express their opinions and not necessarily an anti-opinion, saying this guy's wrong, but saying this is what I do, they would have to reach out to their customers independently and not sort of in mass. Because I think money is the bottom line issue as to how we hear and learn things.
So I definitely agree with you. Money is a concern, and rightly so. I think a lot of people have concerns with how much money is being spent in elections. Elections aren't cheap to run. But one thing I think we often kind of think about is money puts value on people, and it really doesn't. It does to a degree, but it really doesn't as well. For instance, the RTC and the DTC were really successful tonight, getting a lot of people in this room. A lot of people are hearing it. There's some cameras. They have an ability to project their message tonight, and it's just two very talented people that kind of did this, along with some support. I could write some op-eds and it can get to a lot of people. Everyone has talents for getting their voice out there, and it doesn't have to necessarily equate to money. So I can understand your concern with the money aspect. You know, you feel like you're getting drowned out, but at the end of the day, everyone has their own set of talents, and you kind of have to look at the different talents in election time of how to get your word out there. And that doesn't necessarily mean that one voice is more valuable than the other one. I hope I'm kind of answering your question. I wasn't quite sure exactly what you were asking, but I was trying to address the money thing.
I think that the money thing being said was about not whether a campaign earns money, because we're not talking about campaigns. We're talking about private entities that support individuals or issues. And I was saying, if you take money out of the equation, then you have an even more even playing field for how you are allowed to address what's going on. And the big money is spent on, basically on television advertising.
It's spent many ways.
So anyway, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Just to be clear, this is separate from candidates running for office. All this whole conversation, when you run for office, there are limits for how much you can give to every candidate, and everyone's treated the same in that regard. This is independent voices for issues and also for speaking about candidates.
Thank you, Paul Craney. Paul Lowenstein?
Yeah, Paul's right about limits on direct contributions to candidates, and they're pretty high actually, $2,700 if I'm not mistaken, which cuts out a lot of people already. But be that as it may, what's the real problem is outside money and super PACs and that sort of thing, which really have exploded since Citizens United in terms of the amount of money. And I just want to make it clear too that a constitutional amendment along the lines that's called for would not itself set campaign finance regulations. That would be up to the democratic process. What we want to do is allow our democracy to work. We passed a bipartisan campaign finance law, also known as McCain-Feingold, in 2002, and that law was basically invalidated by the Supreme Court decision. So what it calls into question is the ability of we the people to decide democratically what, if any, limits there should be on money in politics. So.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions? Lady in the back?
I have to beg a little bit of ignorance on this ballot question as I'm here tonight. And so my question might be a silly one, but shouldn't we be really talking about specifically what this ballot question is about, and that's the creation of a commission? So I look at this commission, a group of individuals of broad backgrounds, political, whatever their backgrounds are, to research, draft reports, and now we're jumping into constitutional amendments. Nothing's been done. This is simply a group of individuals will come together and maybe put further analysis on the situation and report. I'm more interested in understanding what the disadvantage to that would be versus the advantage. I mean, what is there to lose to have such a commission? And that's really what the ballot question is about, more than getting into the weeds about campaign financing.
Yeah, ma'am, would you like Paul Lowenstein to answer first, or Paul Craney?
Oh, both.
Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to answer first. So right now, everyone has the same exact freedom that's treated under current law. The commission is empowering a bunch of elected officials to come up with ways to essentially advocate for regulating the public speech.
The Commission's recommendations would be non-binding. We've been waiting, in January it'll mark 9 years since Citizens United. We've had no action taken by Congress. A number of bills have been filed in Congress, but none has been passed. And so the Commission's purpose is basically to put this issue back on the front burner and get it done, because until we do, we've lost our democracy.
Thank you. Another question? Lady over here.
This is great exercise for me. Thank you.
I'm with the woman behind me. I'm very naive about this whole thing. And one of the things that I found in the question is the commission. who is going to be putting the commission together, and how long will these people be on the commission, and who is going to be electing them, and how many of them?
Question for both, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I will let Paul speak to that since they're proposing this and they're in charge of who would do all those things.
I'm happy to take the question. There will be 15 members on the commission, 3 appointed by the governor, 3 by the attorney general, 3 by the secretary of state, 3 by the Senate president, and 3 by the speaker of the House. And there would be a 2-month period from January and February to apply for a position on the commission and put your hat in the ring, so to speak. And by the end of April, though, the 15-member commission would have to be established. And then from there, they would have the rest of the year. Their report would be due on December 31st. They would be expected to hold hearings and listen to the public. And as I said, their recommendations would be non-binding, but it would really elevate the issue and kickstart the conversation again about the nature of our democratic institutions in the United States. So does that answer your question?
That's one part of it. How long would they be on that commission for?
Just to the end of the year. December 31st, 2019 is the deadline for the report. After that, they're done. They make their recommendation, that's it.
Okay, thank you. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Any more? Okay, well, let's move on to ballot 3. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, our speaker who will be taking the pro position for ballot 3 is Tracy McKay. Tracy is a kindergarten teacher, Needham resident, and a mom of 2 transgender children. She is an advocate for transgender equality and shares her story wherever she can in order to further this cause, as well as to support other parents going through this experience. Tracy?
Thank you. So, good evening. I'm sure that a lot of you have heard a lot about this question in the last week or so, and you will hear more tonight and more in the upcoming weeks. So I am thrilled to be here tonight to give you some real facts about this question. So as Jim said, my name is Tracy McKay, and I am the very, very proud parent of 3 children, 2 of whom are transgender. So for the first 17 years of parenting these wonderful children, I thought that I was raising 3 boys, but I was wrong. About 5 years ago, both my oldest and my youngest child came to me and let me know that they were transgender. And about 3 years ago was the first time that they began living full-time as the young women that they always knew themselves to be. So as you can imagine, this was not always easy. And there were a lot of difficult emotions that we had to go through during this time. And one of those emotions was fear. And I have to tell you, even now, today, there are not many days that go by that I do not fear for my children's emotional and even physical well-being. And this fear has really only intensified as my children's rights have become under attack. So, as you may know, the law that Governor Baker signed into effect in 2016 protects transgender citizens in all public spaces. And that means restaurants, stores, theaters, hospitals, medical offices, and yes, restrooms. It ensures that my daughters cannot be legally discriminated against. But if this law is repealed, that will no longer be the case. And every time my daughters go to the movies with their friends, to a restaurant, to a store, they have to face the possibility that they will be humiliated and turned away. And every time they go to a medical office or to an emergency room, they face the possibility that they will not get maybe even the life-saving treatment that they need just because they are transgender. Now, those opposed to this law would have you believe that it poses a threat to public safety, but this is simply not true. The fact is that since this law went into effect in 2016, there have been no increases in incidents in locker rooms or restrooms. You may also not know that this law has been in effect in the city of Boston since 2002. And they also say there has been no increase in incidents of crime in restrooms since it went into effect. This is also true in the 17 other states, Washington, D.C., and the over 200 cities and towns that have these laws throughout the nation. Recently, a recent study has come out by the Williams Institute, and they corroborate these findings. They have found no correlation between public accommodations law for transgender people and crimes in bathrooms and locker rooms. And that is why the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police and over 50 sexual assault prevention organizations oppose the repeal of this law. They know that we are all safer when we are all protected. So those of us who are proponents of this law, we also value safety and privacy. And that is why I am glad that there are laws in place to protect me in restrooms. If someone goes into a restroom to commit a crime, he or she can and will be arrested. We hear anecdotes from the opposition about these crimes, and what you need to understand in those crimes, those people were arrested. So again, all of us proponents, we also want safety, and this law does nothing to defer that safety. So another group that is firmly behind this law is the Massachusetts business community. Companies like Google, Eastern Bank, Harvard Pilgrim Health, they all oppose the repeal of this law because they know that along with everything else, these anti-discrimination laws are simply good business. So we spent a lot of time talking about restrooms in this discussion, but what we really, really need to be talking about is that transgender people are our neighbors, they're your kids' teachers, they're your co-workers and fellow citizens, and they deserve to be treated with the same respect and dignity and afforded the same protections that the rest of us are as well. And that is what this question is about. It's not about restrooms. It is about allowing all citizens in Massachusetts to participate fully and safely in public life, free from discrimination. So I've just given you a lot of facts about why I think yes on 3 is important. But for me, I'm a parent like many of you, and I want the same thing for my kids as you want for yours. And I want them, like you, to be safe, to be protected, to be treated with dignity and respect. Isn't that what all parents want for their kids? And just because my children are transgender does not make them any less worthy of any of those things. And that is why I urge you to vote yes on question 3 for dignity for all Massachusetts citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Our speaker who will be presenting the con position is Debbie Dugan. She's the chairman of Keep Massachusetts Safe, which is the organization supporting the no position on question 3. She lives in Watertown, has been an election commissioner in Watertown, and serves on the board of directors of the Jenny Museum in Plymouth. Debbie?
This is a lot taller than it looks when I'm sitting over there. My name is Debbie Dugan, and I live in Watertown. I'm the chairwoman of Keep Mass Safe, Vote No on question 3, and I want to tell you why this is the position that we are taking. We want to repeal the bathroom and what we call the bathroom and locker room law. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and I'm a homemaker. I'm just an ordinary citizen, I'm not a professional. I believe that the most basic responsibility of our government is to provide for safety for all people. On a local level, that's, keeping the potholes filled and having good drinking water, police departments, fire departments. On a state level, it gets larger and grander, and on a federal level, it goes well beyond that. However, in 2016, when this law was passed by the Massachusetts state legislature, we believe that it was a very poorly written law because it does not protect women, children, and what we call vulnerable people. And those vulnerable people are the very people that this law professes to protect. Unfortunately, because this law allows all biological men, even convicted sexual predators, to enter women's spaces. Entry isn't based on physiology or biology, but allows a person to self-identify as whatever gender identity they claim in that moment to enter. An amendment was proposed that would have prohibited level 2 and 3 sexual predators from entering these spaces. Beacon Hill failed to protect the women and children and vulnerable people. Businesses now, instead of protecting their customers and their employees, are looking the other way when some situations arise in these spaces, public bathrooms, locker rooms, showers, changing rooms, even women's shelters, because there are heavy fines that come along with this law. If you are charged with a civil rights violation, you will be arrested, you can pay upwards of $50,000 or go to jail for a year. This law has gone too far. And what we hear is that there's been no uptick in the recorded incidences of problems in these spaces. Well, if you were a business owner, you would probably take a store policy that we're going to just kind of step back and hands off because we don't want to be arrested, we don't want to be fined, and we don't want the bad publicity that comes along with this. I am going to give you a very, very recent situation that happened just a week ago yesterday. It happened here in Massachusetts in the Woburn Target. A family was there, a mother and 3 young children. They were having a bite to eat in the store, and the little girl, the 10-year-old little girl, had to use the restroom. So she went into the restroom, and she was in the toilet area, and a man was in the room. I don't know the situation, if he was already in there or if he came in after she was already present. But he came in, and he was talking to her through the door. He tried to open the bathroom toilet door to her stall. He enticed her with, come with me and I'll get some candy for you. This is the scenario that we don't want for any children. We don't want this for any women. We don't want this for any of our 20-year-olds or young 10-year-old children. We don't want this for the very people that this law says it is going to protect. Unfortunately, police officers, there was an amendment that would have protected police officers when they respond to these calls so that they would not be charged with a civil rights violation. That too was turned down by the Massachusetts state legislature. No one should ever be discriminated against. Our position is not about discrimination. Our position is strictly about safety and privacy for women, children, and those vulnerable people that use these spaces. I ask you to support us to vote no and repeal this bad law and protect the citizens of the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'll open it up for questions. Do we have any questions for Tracy or for Debbie? Gentleman in the third row.
I think it's clear we all want to protect transgenders. We also don't want to have inappropriate people, into the bathrooms or showers, with our 12-year-old granddaughter. But I have a much more basic question than that. How, after millennia, men have always been men, women have been women, and despite physiology, despite gene testing, despite X and Y chromosomes, how did we get to the point where, in order to do these protections for a small minority of people, we needed to allow a man to call himself a woman and by law become a woman? I mean, how did we ever get to this place?
Sir, do you want to direct your question to one of the two ladies or for both?
I'd like both of them to answer.
Okay, thank you. Tracy, would you like to start first?
Sure. I guess what I would say is that while we're sitting here now talking about transgender people have always existed. Just like gay people have always existed, and I hear that same line of questioning, no one was gay when I was growing up. Well, yes, they were. They were gay, they were trans, they just didn't come out. So they've been here for a long time, and they're here now, and they are finally speaking up and getting their rights. The fact of the matter is, I don't want inappropriate people in the bathroom with me either. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about sexual predators. We're not talking about inappropriate people. We are talking about transgender people who simply want to go in and go to the bathroom. They go to the bathroom and they come out. The anecdotes or the one story we just heard, and the ones that are in the pamphlet, when you read about those, you find that that person was not transgender, was not professing to be transgender, was not using this law as any type of cover. And if you look further, those people were all arrested. So the laws worked exactly the way the laws were supposed to work.
Debbie?
Yes, unfortunately, the situation that I talked to you about after the police interviewed this little girl, having to bring her back to the target, where she didn't want to enter. And the police had observed the surveillance cameras and the video. So they have a suspect, but they told the family he did nothing illegal. So that's why this law needs to be repealed. Because there is nothing, there's no one standing at our bathroom doors or our shower room doors. There's no one standing there that can monitor our thoughts or our intentions. And that's why this is so dangerous. Men have an advantage over women, and especially little girls.
Any more questions? Lady in the second and last row.
I have a question for the no.
Debbie?
Debbie. So are you saying that a level 1 or level 2 sexual predator will suddenly become law-abiding and not go into a bathroom?
Well, no, absolutely not. Well,
That's all.
In fact, that's interesting because I wrote that down earlier today and I thought, well, what makes us think the people who break the law aren't going to continue to break the law?
Exactly.
Well, fine. But then that's why our position is men don't belong in these women's spaces. That way, there isn't the opportunity for them to break the law. This little girl and her family,
makes no sense.
This little girl and this little girl is very fortunate to have survived.
What you said you can't be done.
Yes, I'd like to remind everybody that this is not a debate. Please.
I'm sorry.
Apology accepted.
Can I just...
Sure, Tracy, would you like to respond?
I deeply am disturbed by the fact this has nothing to do with sexual predators. There is nothing at all to do with sexual predators. Sexual predators, people who have gone to jail for molesting, are allowed to go in restrooms all the time. and that is not against the law. So I fail to understand why we are continuing to frame this, well, I feel like I know why we're continuing to do it, to produce fear by using the term sexual predator, when that is not, we're talking about transgender people who have done nothing wrong and should not be discriminated against because people who are, would come into a bathroom and do something wrong might do that. It's two separate things.
Thank you, Tracy. Kate Canny, you had your hand up.
Just a clarification. Debbie, you spoke earlier to this person didn't face, he couldn't be arrested for going into the bathroom.
That's what the police said, that he didn't do anything illegal.
Okay, so I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, you know, if he's soliciting a child, that's one thing, and that's awful. But I'm just trying to figure out, like, what is the crime that, if this bathroom bill were repealed, what crime would this person now be facing? Is there a felony for a person of the opposite gender entering a bathroom? I'm just trying to figure out, is this going to suddenly make us safer? Because a predator is a predator is a predator, and I think if you're identifying as one gender and you're accessing the bathroom, because little boys are just as vulnerable, that's not going to stop you. So I'm just kind of curious as to what this penalty or felony or something that's going to stop somebody from going into the bathroom.
It would certainly help prevent abuse and potential abuse.
Tracy?
We are, to have this be a logical answer, it would mean that someone who would go in and abuse someone in a restroom is so law-abiding that until they see an opportunity to get into that restroom that is legal, they're not going to take it. And the fact of the matter is, I said, and Debbie repeated it, that there has been no increase in crimes in bathrooms. So the opposite stands, that if you repeal this law, there will be no decrease in crimes in bathrooms. Those people that will go in and hurt someone in a bathroom will continue to do that, regardless of this law.
If I could respond to that?
I think we should move on to another question. Thank you. Gentleman in the front row.
I think there was a question or some statement relative to fines and being arrested and people being afraid to stand up to things. That's not what I understood the law to actually do, and that's actually very different than what it actually does, from what I understand. So maybe you could clarify what the reality of that law is.
Yeah, I'm not an attorney, and
nor am I.
No,
maybe you could do it in layman's terms.
So my understanding of the law is that there are very severe fines for businesses. Okay, let me give you a scenario.
Well, I don't need scenarios.
No, I'm going to give you a scenario because that's the way I talk. Okay. So my husband is taking his daughter, he's going to pick her up at the YMCA after her swim lesson. He knows she's inside changing from her swimsuit into her street clothes. And a gentleman walks up and he's heading into the ladies' locker room where his daughter is. And he says to him, "Oh, excuse me, sir, that's the ladies' room. The men's room's over here." And the gentleman just keeps walking, and he says it again. That man, if he is a transgender, he can have that man arrested. He could have that's my understanding of the law.
Excuse me,
we have different understandings.
We're just question and answer, not a debate. And Tracy, would you like to answer?
I just want to clarify, because I do have an understanding of the law based on Freedom Mass's research. Freedom Mass is the Yes on 3 campaign, and their research of what the issues of this fine. It does allow for fines in this law. However, a person, this situation just is not true. In order to be fined, a person or a business has to have multiple accounts of discrimination over a period of 7 years. So yes, you will get a fine if after 7 years you have multiple times that you discriminate against someone. The first time when you try to ask someone about it you will not get a fine. If you continue to do it over 7 years, yes, then you will get a fine. And meanwhile, that's the same type of law that is in the books for any type of discrimination on a race, religion, or gender.
Lady in the back row over here.
So I'm the biological transgender woman that everybody is afraid of. So I'm here to say that I've been here for my whole life. And I only felt safe once I moved to Massachussetts for that. And I have talked to police officers to ask them, if I am my authentic self, does that cause harm to other people? And I'm hearing it from police officers and district attorneys that that's not true. So I would like to ask you, what do I go say to those police officers and district attorneys that are telling me to my face that what you're saying is not correct? I want to be able to defend you. How can I defend you when they say that what you're telling me is incorrect?
And this is directed toward Debbie.
Yes.
Thank you.
As Tracy said, transgenders have been with us for a very long time, maybe forever. They have used those facilities that they were most comfortable with and felt safest in for a very long time. Our problem with this law is that it opens the floodgates to other people, I am not saying you are a threat, other people whose intentions are to harm and to hurt.
Tracy, would you like to answer the question?
Well, first of all, I would just say if you are going to be speaking on this, the term is transgender person, not transgenders. That's actually quite,
I'm sorry.
Just for your own going forward. Again, I would just say, you know, the police, Massachusetts police are behind this. Policemen are behind this. They know it makes all of us safer. Again, I can't say this enough, but this law protects transgender people. Why we are talking about other people that would come in and harm somebody. There are laws in place. It was illegal to come into a bathroom to harm somebody before this law came into place, and it is illegal to do so now. Nothing has changed. If someone comes in for an illegal purpose, they can and should be arrested, and that is what happens. This makes no difference in that regard.
Thank you. There was another question over here.
It's similar to other people.
Yep.
So, one of my questions for Debbie is, where in the process of transition, because it's not a light switch for people as a transgender person moves through the course of living their authentic self, where in that process do you determine they can or cannot use the locker room, restroom, etc. of the gender that they identify with? And just if I can, you know, say on male and female bathrooms, this is not a woman's bathroom only issue. We're talking about the entire population. So is it when somebody decides to dress differently? Is it when a transgender person who identifies as a male has a beard? Is that more comfortable in a woman's bathroom? I mean, how would anyone know whether they were biologically male or female at birth? So I guess I'm not clear about where, you know, how well thought out your concern is about at what point, you know, are people comfortable and become uncomfortable.
That isn't our issue. Our issue is safety and privacy for women, children, and vulnerable people in these spaces. And we don't believe that men belong in women's spaces and that they will be much safer without men in those spaces. And I've already said, I've already responded to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wave my hand at you. that the transgender person, people, a transgender person, they have been using these spaces. We want them to be safe. We do not want criminals coming into these spaces. And I'm not referring to the people that this law is professing to protect.
We have time for one more question from a person we haven't heard from yet. Okay, student in the back row, very good.
Representing Dover Sherburne High School. Hi. So I have a question for the pro side of the argument. So in terms of businesses that are going to be affected under this law, transgender rights are protected in businesses like restaurants or other. But in the case of a family-owned business that practices a very orthodox religion and says, under the First Amendment, we believe that we only have to serve or protect the rights of men and women just based on their religion, what do you have to say to refute that? Because that kind of gets into the argument of First Amendment rights versus this law.
So you're talking religious freedoms, right? Like you're talking about like the cake situation, the cake, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I respect everyone's religious beliefs, but if you are out in the community and have a service that serves people in your community, you can't choose, you can't say, I'm not going to serve a person of a certain race. You can't say I'm not going to serve a person of a certain religion, and this is no different. If you are out in the public space providing services, if you don't want to provide services to all, you should not be providing that service.
Even if that goes against the First Amendment right?
If you are providing that service, there's certain groups that you can't discriminate that. And right now, gender identity is part of that protected class, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank the speakers very much for coming tonight. It takes a lot of courage and knowledge to speak before a group of people, and we greatly appreciate the knowledge that you shared with us. I would now like to turn it over to Carol, again, the chair of the Democratic Town Committee.
Thank you once again. Thank you to 6 very articulate speakers. Thank you all for coming. Grant and I, when we realized we were doing this on World Series night, was not quite sure, but we have a full house. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Charles River School, for making this facility available to us. And as I said in the beginning, and as Grant reiterated in the beginning, we hope that this is the first of many opportunities for Doverites to get together to speak to each other in this kind of format. So I know many of you know how to get a hold of me, and I'm sure many of you know how to get a hold of Grant. So please email us, call us, stop us at Dover Market. Let us know if there are topics of interest to you as the situation continues in Dover at a local level with town meeting coming up in May and various elections. If you want us to get involved and put something together like this for that, we would be most glad to do that. For those of you who are very impressed with our moderator, Jim Rapetti, his next performance is at town meeting on May 6th.